Welcome to the Social Science Matrix for this evening's special program honoring the legacy of Professor Neil Smelser. I'm Raka Ray, Dean of Berkeley Social Sciences and a professor of sociology. I was fortunate enough to be in the department. I think Neil was just about to retire, and so the first big event I ever went to was his retirement event. Which I remember because I think the mayor sent somebody to declare this Neil Smelser Day, and I was thinking, wow, we actually have faculty who have days in Berkeley named after them. We didn't have faculty like that. We had Neil Smelser.
Yeah.
Let me say a special welcome to the Sociology Department Chair, Dave Harding, and retired members of our faculty and others. And I especially want to say hello to Neil's family, to Sharon Smelser, Sarah Smelser, and his other members of his family, friends and colleagues in attendance. And of course, it's wonderful to see the always amazing Professor Emerita Arlie Hochschild, who will be speaking to us this evening. You all know who Neil Smelser was, and I'm not going to rehearse that. I just want to say just a couple of things about him, because in addition to being a scholar of renown, Neil Smelser was known as the constant diplomat. He was frequently in the midst of difficult and charged situations, including the aftermath of the free speech movement. The university often called upon him to help and to advise in moments of great difficulty. He understood the power of ideas and knowledge to build upon itself through generations of scholars. And it's why I think he had the foresight to found and name an endowed fund for sociology graduate students, enabling future generations to build upon his work. That is a true legacy. The only other thing I want to say, and I was just checking my facts before I said this, is in recognition of his many contributions, not just scholarly contributions, but his many contributions to the institution. UC Berkeley honored him with the title of University Professor. It's a very rare title, and it turns out that there are fewer university professors at Berkeley than Nobel laureates. It's that rare. Let me turn to just say a couple of things about our speaker, Arlie Hochschild. In her book, Strangers in Their Own Land, Arlie Hochschild wrote brilliantly and movingly about poor rural Louisianans who became activists in the Tea Party movement. In today's talk, she will draw on Neil Smelser's work on collective behavior to help us understand how the MAGA movement has come to dominate the Republican Party. I hope that I'll get a chance to speak to all of you after the talk. I'm glad to welcome you all to the sociology community. And to welcome our illustrious speaker and to begin our program, I'd like to turn the mic over to Sarah Smelser, Neil's daughter, who's a faculty member in the Woonsuk Kim School of Art at the University of Illinois.
I'm actually at Illinois State University. We pride ourselves on being number 2 in the state. All right, so I want to thank Christian Gordon. Is he here? Oh, he's doing the video. Oh, awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much, Christian, for and your team, for organizing this. And I want to thank all of you for coming, and thank Arlie for being our focus this evening. And I thought what I would do is start by reading 2 land acknowledgements. One that is, I think it's UC Berkeley's land acknowledgement. I'll ask you if that's true. And then also the state of California's land acknowledgement. They're both short and to the point, which I appreciate. Okay, so UC Berkeley, we recognize that Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyu-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. Is that the university?
Yep.
Oh, okay. All right, so here's the state's land acknowledgement. We honor and are grateful for the land we occupy and recognize the ongoing damage of settler colonialism. We commit to pursuing continuous collaborations with the tribal nations of California. All right, so I volunteered to introduce Arlie, but I've decided I'm not going to do that. I guess in the traditional sense. I'm not going to list all of Arlie's accolades because I would be here all evening long. And I also noticed when I went on her Wikipedia page, there was so much there. I felt like, well, if anybody really wants to research Arlie, they should go there too, right? They would get all of this information about her rigorous research agenda, her years in academia, and her contributions to the discipline of sociology, the study of sociology. And also, I mean, one thing I did pick up actually was the varied ways in which her research has taken her, which I was impressed by. So, and another reason I didn't really want to list many of, or, Arlie's many accolades is because this is our first Neil Smelser lecture. And it might be one of the only ones where my dad had such direct contact with the speaker. And to me, that sort of translates into a personal event rather than a listing of professional accomplishments. So I thought I would really more speak about personal things. And specifically, I wanted to speak about professional basketball. Do we have any NBA fans out there? A few hands. Okay, so if you are truly a fan, if you're truly an NBA fan, you know the only team that's worth rooting for is the Warriors. Thank you. Perfect answer. The best answer. My dad was a basketball fan, and he was a Warriors fan. And I'm not sure how we did this, but we did go to basketball games when I was a kid. I went to a game recently and it broke my mom's bank. So I'm not sure how we used to go to so many games, but I do remember going to a lot of games. And then my fandom sort of slumped down. I pursued the rest of my life and sort of moved out of town and did my thing. But my dad was a Warriors fan through thick and thin, through 40 years of thin. Definitely. And I started to pay more attention in 2015 when Steph Curry started to impress everyone with his skill and his humility and his style. And that's when I really started to sort of get back into watching these games. And that's something that I always liked to do with my dad. Up until a couple of days before he died, that was something that we always liked to do together. And I remember when I saw them, when I saw them win the series in 2015, there was different verbiage than I had ever heard before. There was sort of like a new language. And there was a lot of talk about playing with joy and playing with love and playing with passion and then playing with compassion. And I could kind of guess what some of those things meant. But playing with compassion, I had to mull over a little bit because, the word compassion, we often think about it as sort of commiseration or understanding someone else's misery, which I guess you could play with compassion in that sense. But after sort of thinking about it and actually looking up the word compassion in many different places, I saw that there was a running thread where compassion could be seen as acknowledging someone else's successes and celebrating them as if they were your own, or celebrating them to the extent that you celebrate your own successes. And so that's sort of how I like to think about, playing with compassion. And I think that can translate into so many things, but notably teaching. You know, because you do celebrate your students' successes at the same level and with the same vigor that you celebrate your own. And I think that's worth mentioning here, since Arlie was one of my dad's students, became one of his colleagues, and I think there was a lot of compassion at play, you know, and it was sympathetic, right? So, I really wanted to put that out there and maybe just leave it as a little crumb that I'm leaving behind here on the. I guess maybe one reason I'm opening up for Arlie too is to showcase her speaking skills, because you know, because mine aren't up to the same standards as her are. But I thought I would just sort of leave you all with the concept of playing with compassion and how it relates here. So please help me welcome Arlie Hochschild.
Thank you very much. I want to first say a word for some people that can't be here. Tina, one of his daughters, isn't able to be here. And this is better. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Does this come out? No. Leave it? Okay. Judson King, who was a good friend of his and a colleague, and they worked as a team on many administrative issues, is unfortunately not able to be here. But he's a large part of how the fund was arranged for this very thing we're celebrating here, the series, the Neil Smelser Lectures. Now, I'd like to try and do three things. First, a few words about Neil Smelser, the person, the human being, and then as a teacher. And then I'd like to have you join me on the odyssey of taking some of his books, three in particular, and lifting from them some of the concepts in the treasure box of Neil Smelser's enormous corpus of work in trying to understand the political moment we're in right now as we face the election of 2024. First, something about the arc of his life. He was born in 1930 on his grandparents' farm in Cahokia in the northeast of Missouri, a town of 1,000. And he moved when he was a baby to Phoenix, Arizona, where he and his two brothers grew up. And this will be brief because he received his BA and his PhD from Harvard, became a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. He arrived in the sociology department in 1958, received tenure, unbelievably, the next year. Do you know how often that happens? Okay, university professorships and Nobel Prizes to the side. Could be the first time. And he rose to run the premier journal, the American Sociological Review, became president of ASA, worked as an assistant to the chancellor in the heady days of the 1960s. So he's doing all of this. And there was, I think it was kind of animated by a desire to take on the world and kind of shake sociology and kind of say, well, what do you got that could help us understand what the world is doing? During the 36 years that we had him, he taught thousands of undergraduates, and this took my breath away, 100 PhD dissertations. You know, those of you who are in the trade know that every dissertation you supervisors like you've written that book, you know. And so this is enormous generosity. And I guess we have to ask, what is it that a teacher does when a teacher teaches? It's not just what they say. It's showing you, you know, as a student, when you knock on the door, you go in, you're seeing a human being, and they're modeling for you the kind of human being you can be. And I remember knocking on Neil Smelser's door, and there was a friendly face. Hi, come on in. You know, as if you could just sit down and be sort of slide into the role of apprentice, you know, and well, what are you interested in? What are you working on these days? You know, it's actually probably still rare, but in that day it was really rare. I remember the advisor I was actually assigned to, and I opened the door, I was walking into a cloud of depression. I thought, let me get to Neil Smelser's office. So there was something buoyant and joyous of a certain kind, because he saw the joy in finding your purpose. And that's what you sat down to do. It wasn't he was just being a nice guy. Well, there was a purpose, and he was going to help you get yours. He wasn't the kind of Olympian, you know, narcissistic professors that, you will be a clone of me. No, and I'll divvy off a little piece of my work and you can do that. Not at all. What's interesting to you? So although I myself in my career have done wildly different things, then I'm talking flight attendants and nannies and, you know, Appalachian right-wingers, the moment. He was a theorist, but he didn't force that on any of us who were his students. So he took you seriously. You know, one more little example. I wrote this little essay, weird little essay on kind of what it's like to be a wife of someone with a big career. Later, this was called the two-person career, and I didn't have that word, but that's what I was interested in. And I wrote this up and gave it to him. And he was very positive, go back, do X, Y, and Z to it. I took it to another professor also who said, oh, well, maybe you'll think of doing something for the Ladies' Home Journal, which was showing me the door. He will remain nameless. But that was actually more common than you would think in those days. And so Neil was just the opposite of that. He said, well, you know, the Journal of Marriage and Family has gotten much better recently. And, you know, why don't you try that? And it was the first thing I ever wrote that was published. So that's who you have there. And Neil worked very hard in many ways, but also as a teacher. I heard one funny story of a student who said, I worked for 7 months to get this, my paper written. I finally handed it in to Professor Smelser. And in 3 days, he gave me a 9-page single-spaced commentary on it. And the student actually got a little mad. You know, look, 7 months. And you got back to me so quickly. And Neil's answer to that was, you have your hang up and I have mine. So he was also working on his own work. He published 21 books, 32 edited books, and 128 articles and essays. And his work is still being used in classes, although it began in 1962. So what I'd like to do today with you is to open up the treasure box of his concepts and ideas and use them for some guidance, to play with them, I should say. He obviously is, we're not getting his pronouncements on these recent events, of course, but it's what I think he would have done in a playful way using his own corpus of work. So let me pose three questions. And the first is, how did the MAGA movement, Make America Great Again movement, actually rise up? When you look at it, actually, I think it started before Donald Trump in around 2012, when the Tea Party was kind of absorbed the 2008 recession, and a lot of blue-collar whites couldn't recover from that 2008 recession. And they thought, well, look, I'm not going to earn any more, but at least I could pay fewer taxes. And that was an idea that got great traction already before he appeared on the scene. But then Trump got hold of that, became the hot base, I think, of the Trump movement. And then it spread and spread into the Republican Party, split the Republican Party in half, and basically came to dominate the Republican Party. Then 2016, the Republican Party dominated the country. So how from that? Now, actually, it's eating into, quote, Democratic constituencies. We see Asian Americans, Blacks, 22% Black males voted for Donald Trump. So it's sort of still growing. It's still growing, still happening. And so how did this happen? How did we get here? If we pick up Neil Smelser's Theory of Collective Behavior, written in 1963, and used to explain the FSM on this very campus and other student uprisings of the 60s, we can take some things from that to understand this uprising from the right. Now, he starts off by saying you can't actually understand a movement like this just by looking at personalities. You can't just say, oh, well, those people, you know, they're not very educated, or they're really angry people, no, or they're particularly rigid. Well, there are angry, rigid people that are not Trumpers. And the people that you meet are just as smart as you are. They're just as the same kind of psychological makeup you and I might have, but they've been caught up in what Smelser calls a collective movement. And collective movements have their own logics. And that's where Smelser got really helpful for us. What is that logic? Well, it's got 6 different parts. And one part he calls structural conduciveness. So what is that? He's talking about setting the stage. And I think there are lots of things we can point to. But if we look at the immediate stage, we have to go back historically just to the 70s. This is the immediate setting, I think. There came to be the haves and have-nots of globalization. That is, there were blue-collar and rural and semi-rural areas where there were older factories and smaller factories that were more vulnerable to offshoring and automation. And then there were urban or educated centers where there was the latest tech jobs that were kind of more robust factories that were less vulnerable to this. And so gradually you got a separation, economic separation of two parts of this country. And if we look at all the red states and bunch them together and compare them to the blue states, in the red states, we're looking at poorer states, states with more unemployed people, with higher rates of eviction and lower life expectancies, more high school dropouts, all of the social logic that goes with poverty and downward mobility are higher in red states and lower in blue states. All those rates are lower in blue states. And rates of change, of upward mobility, are lower in the red states, higher in the blue states. So that's kind of one. If we're looking at structural conduciveness, it isn't random where the people are who are joining the MAGA movement. Now, even before that, and I would put this in as part of the structural conduciveness too, if we look at who are the MAGA people, they are white, they are blue collar, they are rural and semi-rural, and they've also been through a history that we're not looking at. There's a new book out by Max Fraser called Hillbilly Highway that says, look, we know about the Black migration out of the South. 6 million people started in the South. They go to urban centers in the North. Well, as an even larger migration of a white hillbilly migration from the South and the lower South, upper South, especially to Midwestern factory towns like Cincinnati, Chicago, Detroit. And they would move to kind of hillbilly ghettos where they were established as secondary whites. They were taking jobs for, in factories. They were feared by the settler whites in these cities. And then come this 80s and they're offshoring and automation, and they have to force back out of these cities. So they would leave the country and the dusty farm and the debt-ridden mills for the big city, and then offshoring happens and they have to go back. So they're kind of stuck. So this is a demographic pre-existing kind of condition we're not looking at for who it is that turns out there's very recent research on suburban whites in cities who have rural backgrounds, who tend to be more conservative, so and more evangelical. So this is kind of another background factor in this. So turning it to a grab bag, but under this conducive condition, structural condition, I would also put technology, that you got cell phones now, so that when something catches on, it really, it can be, information can spread in a minute, misinformation can spread in half a minute, and that's another factor here too. So that's kind of the precondition, the setup, let's call it. There's a second factor that Smelser is pointing out, which he calls structural strain. He likes the word structural, but he's really talking about something a little more emotional. It's the strain is that people are kind of disturbed, unhappy at what's happening to them. And it's not a big leap to notice that if you are in a poorer area of the country, And you're doing worse. You're looking at, the television is full of images of people in the other sector. There's, hey, how come he's so well off? And I'm seeing all these ads of glorious vacations and in the Mediterranean. I'm working at my 9-to-5 job, if I've got one. So there's kind of a discontent by, we would call that relative deprivation. And so then he's talking about generalized belief, the spread of this factor. And I'm going to come in a minute to what I think animates that spread. He talks about a mobilization for action. And here, the precipitating factor is Donald Trump. Okay. A charismatic leader. And, charismatic leaders are very different from what we call, rational bureaucratic leaders. This is from Weber. And if you look at Biden, he'll point to his, look, I passed this legislation, look, this program. He's not giving you himself, he's giving you what he's done, something structural. That's that kind of leader. But a charismatic leader is a big personality leader who says, I'm not giving you a program, I'm giving you myself. And my power will be based on your relationship to me. Every charismatic leader, and there will be many more to follow Trump, has that character and imagines magical qualities within themselves that you can identify with. So he was, I think, the precipitating factor. And then there was mobilization for action in Smelser's scheme. Rally after rally after rally, you can see it. Look, I'm for you, you're for me. I love you, you love me. I'm taking the hits of liberal America and taking them for you. So there is a charismatic response and mobilization for action. Finally, in his scheme of 6 factors, there's a failure of social control. And there we have the Democratic Party, which I feel is unusually missing charismatic qualities, shall we say, with Biden. And although there is what social control, all of these 4 indictments and 91 counts in those indictments, that's social control, the legal machine is on it. But the popular machine, the political machine is not. There is kind of a blue state disdain for these irrational people we don't understand that believe wrong things. So a kind of a denial and avoidance, which we're paying, I think, heavy price for. So this leads us then to the second question. So we've got collective mobilization, and so there's a movement, and the sociological, all the 6 characteristics that Niels mentioned, get that social movement going. But then how did Trump come to embrace the far, far right? The 3%ers, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys. These are, and Niels Smelser has written a book on the faces of terrorism. Now, they wouldn't call themselves terrorists, but they're pretty close to it. They're a version of it. And in January 6th, some 87% of people that were on the premises were actually MAGA people. not members of violent groups. But the rest of them, about 15%, were. And there was tremendous violence, as you well know, smashing of windows and deaths that took place. There was verbal violence, kill Mike Pence, kill Nancy, visual threats, the hangman's noose, actual violence. And 4 protesters and 5 police officers died. So there was the face of terrorism right there. And the FBI indicted 1,003 people for breaking the law, and at least 476 pled guilty. And what I think Neil Smelser would say again is, for this group too, it's not just personality that accounts for it, but a kind of a logic beneath it, that you have a kind of mobilized discontent, and then you have a loss of faith in the government as an instrument for answering that discontent. A recent Pew study found that only 16% of Americans, this is 2023, say that they trust the government to do what is right most or all of the time. So this accumulation of discontent, and you can add COVID to it. These things are additive that increase people's fear. And gosh, they're going to close down all the businesses. My kids are a year behind in school now that they're closing the schools. That added to, I'm not sure about my job, and other people are better off than me. And other people, that is in blue states, are telling us how we should respond to this. This is a group of people who feel colonized. That is red state people, in addition to all of it. So you have a mobilized discontent, and then you have, the government's not going to fix it. So let me go to the guy with big personality. He will fix it. And he, I think, is driving the move toward violence, he himself. So let us go now to the third question, which to me is the kind of the elemental question that underlies all this. How did Trump actually win so many hearts and minds of rural, white, blue-collar, red America? I mean, we've got the outlines of who they are, but how did it happen? And I think for this, we should look at his book, The Social Edges of Psychoanalysis. I think here's where we do need to really look at how many people, all of us, work. So we've got a lot of discontent. Government can't help us. We're turning to the big personality. And what's the big personality do? He catches us in a regressed state. Now this is, we can all get regressed. We're adults, we look like adults, we got gray hair, we're adults, but we can be frightened and go back to feeling like children. We look like an adult, but we feel like a child. And in that regressed state, I think this charismatic figure can come forward as a parental figure, I'll take care of it figure that says, okay, you've lost your mommy and daddy, government doesn't work. I'm going to be as big as the government, me and my big personality. And Then what happens in that state, which all of us can get into, in that state, you can project onto the big, charismatic, powerful leader your wishes. He's going to take care of it. He's going to protect me. If I've lost my job, he'll bring it back. I've lost my pride. He'll bring it back. Great again. I've lost feeling my sense of fitting into the culture. Things I know how to do don't matter anymore. The qualities I have as a blue-collar worker, I don't have a BA or anything beyond it. But I know how to get you 5 miles through very tricky, hillbilly kind of territory. And no one knows that road the way I do, but now it doesn't matter. So he will restore my dignity. There's this that goes on. And, you know, there are digital playing cards that play into this. You can get a for $99 a picture of Donald Trump in a Superman suit. And there's another one, you know, he's a cowboy. Just look it up. You will not find Joe Biden figure. And it tells us that something psychological is going on, being exploited, one presumed. But there's a great project for somebody here to look at the merch. What does it tell us about what's desired? Because in some ways, Trump is the precipitating cause, but in some way, the people made Trump. He didn't make them. So there's this emotional fusion I mentioned before of I will carry you, and you can project onto me what you desire. I will meet it. This is the fantasy. And he keeps it up daily. Can you go through a day without looking at the face of this man? He needs that to keep a relationship going. And you've suffered loss. I'm taking it on. I actually think he's been beatified. You know, I have taken the suffering, all the suffering that you've gone through. It's on me now. And what I do for you. You know. And actually, with COVID, I thought, oh no, you're not going to carry this the whole way. And no, he didn't die. But there is that, I think, projection. There is a whole psychological logic that the psychologists of us in this room know about, where this isn't fictive and it isn't crazy. We can all do it, but it's ongoing in this situation. So I think he's given us a kind of emotional narrative that goes from loss, blue state, downwardly mobile, loss. He's saying, well, you didn't just lose all these things. Someone took it. You know, it's been stolen. Loss to stolen, shame to blame, job security stolen, wages stolen, racial primacy stolen, world where sexual identity was secure, you didn't have to worry, stolen, world where men were men, women were women, stolen, the value of blue-collar knowledge, stolen. And so there is this rich projective plate that Trump has taken onto himself and put on the idea of a stolen election. And that led to January 6th. And it's led to the fact that after each indictment, in each court case, public opinion goes up. And that in 5 states now that he would win opposite Biden in this crossover states projection. So the emotional narrative he's giving goes from lost to stolen, stolen to get it back, and get it back to retribution. Now, in all of this, I think alive and well are the concepts of the social edges of psychoanalysis. We have fusion, we have regression, we have projection, we have externalization. All of these are contained, I think, in the events today. So first, just to recap, we have the collective movement of MAGA, took over the Republican Party, and now much of the country. We have second, we have its turn to the hard right, the violent right. He's cutting off the middle of the Republican Party, and he had Ye to Mar-a-Lago and neo-Nazis, and he's now saying to the violent right, of course, I will pay your legal fees, and when I'm elected, I will let you go. And an embrace of them. He's singing the national anthem with, the jailed, indicted Proud Boys. So all of this legitimates violence. So that's the second thing. And the third is the emotional process of which we're often woefully unaware, through which this kind of power, charismatic power, is conducted. So those are the kinds of things you find in this extraordinary toolbox, this magic box of concepts. Let me end just with the thought that one of his last books was called The Odyssey Experience. And in an Odyssey, the individual sets out on a journey and is then experiences something sometimes uncertain, always uncertain, often fraught with danger. And that is the center of the journey. And then in the end of the Odyssey, the person comes home transformed. And I like to believe that Neil Smelser has left us with a wish for such an odyssey in our own intellectual and personal journeys. Thank you very much.
I think Christian, second. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Arlie, for that outstanding and really just deep analysis in that lecture. I learned so much. It's always wonderful to hear about your work. And I also want to thank the family and friends of Neil for giving us the opportunity to come together. My name is Dave Harding. I'm professor in the sociology department and the department chair. I also want to thank Dean Ray for sponsoring this event and for her leadership in the division more generally. And to my colleagues who are here and the Smelser family for allowing us to remember our colleague and friend. In closing our program, I also want to recognize and thank our students, some of whom are here tonight. Are there any folks here who want to raise their hands? Yeah. Thank you for the work that you do in our department. As you heard from Arlie, Neil understood the importance of training and mentoring and supporting graduate students. And I hope you have the chance to speak to some of our students who are joining us tonight. It's easy to see why Neil and the Smelser family and many others here tonight created a lasting endowment to support our graduate students in the Department of Sociology in the future. So on behalf of the department, I want to thank you for your generosity and your thoughtfulness. And so now Assistant Dean of Development, Christian Gordon, will help us close out the program.
Thanks, Dean. Thank you. I just wanted to add a few words of thanks. Most importantly, I know Professor Hochschild referenced Judson King, who couldn't be here with us this evening, sadly. Arlie and Judd have been a driving force from the very beginning of recognizing and honoring Neil, their colleague, their friend, and I want to thank them for all their work and effort that they put into making this happen. It also turned into outreach to Neil's circle of friends and family that allowed us over the last couple of years to double the Graduate Student Support Fund in his name. And I think you heard tonight just how critically important that is, not just important to Neil, but still with us today. I think it's among our highest priorities here on campus is to support our graduate students, and we're very grateful to have the means to do so. So thank you for coming together and for supporting that. And most importantly, I wanted to thank Joseph, Sarah, and Sharon Smelser for being with us this evening and for all their efforts to make sure that this happened. I hope that we have done Neil's legacy and memory proud tonight. It was an honor for me to be here, to be with all of you, and to learn throughout this process more about the impact that he had on this campus and beyond over nearly half a century. It was a real privilege to be a part of it. So I just wanted to say thank you all for coming together. We will share the recording afterward. Many people around the world were interested but couldn't be here. We'll make sure they have an opportunity to view this. And it reinforces to me just how important this work is when we can revisit someone's work and find it still so relevant and important today. So thank you all for coming together. Thank you, friends and family of Neil Smelser, for remembering and honoring his legacy tonight. And I now invite you out to the reception where we have food and drinks and we can further socialize. Thank you.
Oh, good.